They were one of the biggest pop acts of the last decade.
You could sort of see yourself in one of them, and you could also see yourself being friends with the others.
They were unstoppable, and I think the fact that they really didn't have anyone to compete with at the time really helped.
Little Mix, they sold more than music. I think they sold the element of friendship, sisterhood, female empowerment.
But despite Little Mix's close friendships and chart-topping success, the group was not able to go the distance.
If she has a PR team, they must have been crying watching that, but they should never have allowed her to do it in the first place.
I just didn't understand it at all. It was such a bizarre PR move.
I think we can rule out any chance of Jesy coming back. It's not going to happen.
So how did they go from one of the biggest girl groups in the UK to barely speaking? Leigh-Anne, Jade, Perry and Jesy met for the first time in 2011 when they individually auditioned for The X Factor. The girls failed to make an impact as solo artists, but producers had other plans.
We had this a girl power with the four of them who they really got on. The sisterhood thing was there. They were having fun. You felt as if on a Saturday night you watched them and they had the whole package because they could dance, they could sing, they were just impressing everyone every week, and they just suddenly started getting this big momentum, like with the likes of One Direction. But with girls it was actually quite unusual to have that backing so early on. But it proved how you could see them as like they could be one of your friends, and you identified and related to one of the girls. I think that's what actually really made it work and made it special. You could sort of see yourself in one of them, and you could also see yourself being friends with the others.
Little Mix was a hit, avoiding the final showdown every week and sailing into the grand final as the favourites.
I think at the time there wasn't really any other girl bands around, so obviously Girls Aloud had just finished before, and before that you obviously had sort of the Spice Girls and all the different girl bands in the 90s, and so there really was sort of a gap for a good band. And obviously with shows like X Factor, you get sort of invested in the stories from watching them every week. You feel like you know them on a personal level. And so all of that sort of combined really was like the perfect recipe for success for them to do well.
I want to have a long, successful career.
Yeah, we do want to be so successful, so we're just going to work so hard. We're going to work our bottoms off, aren't we?
We are.
At the time, former X Factor judge Louis Walsh predicted that the foursome would become one of the biggest girl groups in history, and they went on to prove him right. The girls hit the ground running. Their first official single, Wings, debuted at the top of the UK singles chart, but everything changed for them when they released Black Magic in 2015.
With Black Magic, it was like they had this cool girl energy. It was something that we had seen before, but maybe not combined with the modern era, plus the fact that you had the nostalgia. So you had them, looking like it was a Sabrina Teenage Witch sort of type music video. And I think all of the age range, like I was so obsessed with them. You had younger girls, you had older women. It just made sure that everyone was involved, and they had a massive gay following too. And it just that was what the moment that really turned for them in the music industry.
Little Mix went from strength to strength, overtaking the Spice Girls to become the girl band with the most Brit-certified singles in the UK.
They were unstoppable, and I think the fact that they really didn't have anyone to compete with at the time really helped. There was sort of no other British girl bands at this point that they were up against in the charts, and so it really made them look like a solid entity.
They sold more than music. I think they sold the element of friendship, sisterhood, female empowerment, and I think what worked so well for them was the fact that each member had their own identity and they kind of represented a different type of female. And I think like their personalities, they were very accessible and relatable, and they were very good with social media. And I think they just made their fans feel like they were best friends with them. And of course, they were consistent with releasing music, always in the charts, always the songs are really catchy, aren't they? So yeah, they were just the perfect girl band.
Fast forward to 2020, and they had cemented themselves as one of the biggest pop acts to come out of the UK. But behind the scenes, things were not as they seemed. From the moment Little Mix appeared on X Factor, Jesy Nelson had been the target of intense online bullying.
It had a real impact on her. Obviously, all of the girls were quite young at the time. They were sort of like late teens when they joined the band, and so for Jesy, I don't think she was ever prepared for anything like this. I think she'd grown up never having experienced negative comments until that point, and then when you're sort of thrust into this spotlight and then she's being picked apart for things that she can't really control, a lot of it was to do with sort of her looks and her appearance and her weight, and therefore she was sort of really affected by that.
I really worried about her. I remember as a fan and a viewer at the time thinking, is she going to be able to handle this? Because it's tough out there in that industry, and online trolls can be very cruel, and it seemed to be only getting worse. And if you think back then with the social media, it wasn't the intensity that it is today, so it was only ever going to get worse, and it was whether Jesy could deal with that or not.
She reached her breaking point after the COVID pandemic, the time off work making her realise that maybe Little Mix was no longer working for her.
When Little Mix were called into this big meeting in 2020, just before the pandemic, and they were told that one of the girls wanted to leave, and it wasn't Jesy Nelson. This was a huge shock to fans. We didn't know anything about it until many years later, but she was devastated at the time. I think with that point in time for Jesy, she knew that the journey was kind of coming to an end, and then lockdown hit, and so it made her be able to be at home, you know, be away from the trolling, be away from the stage and being judged constantly, and just really be herself for the first time in years and years and years.
Post-lockdown, I think everything was sort of falling apart for her. I think she was unhappy. I think she wasn't happy with how things were in the band. I think she'd obviously spoken out at this point, and even again there was some backlash to that, her just speaking out, and I think she finally sort of just felt like she'd had enough.
Jesy announced her departure on Instagram, telling her fans that being in the band had taken too much of a toll on her mental health.
I was so devastated. As a fan, I was heartbroken because it's just the end of an era. It always happens, doesn't it? You know, you have these groups, they get to their height of success, there's always one person who leaves, and you feel angry at that person because they've essentially ruined that group for you. That's how you feel in that moment of time. You don't know any of the other details, and we didn't know at the time. We just knew that Jesy was struggling, she wanted to step back, and that the other three were going to go ahead.
Publicly, Perry, Leigh-Anne and Jade supported Jesy's narrative, but privately that couldn't have been further from the truth.
The clear thing that obviously didn't happen was one clear separation story agreed by both sides. I think that was the missing piece of the puzzle, which would suggest then how chaotic behind the scenes must have been. Fame is a crazy thing that people can't get ready for and prepare for. And you have to also remember with the X Factor of how it happened, there were 4 girls that didn't know each other that were put together as a band, and 4 teenage girls being thrown into the limelight. I mean, I would have been more surprised if there wasn't issues behind the scenes, you know, like 4 girls on holiday will argue.
Little Mix decided to stay together, becoming a trio, but the drama had only just begun. Less than a year later, and Jesy returned to the spotlight, kickstarting her solo career with Boys, featuring Nicki Minaj.
I remember at the time thinking this was a really strange decision. It felt very much a planned comeback that had maybe gone on before Little Mix had officially ended, you know, because it takes quite a long time to make sure that you're, you know, with the music that you've got and what you want to look like with your new image and all of this. And I remember thinking, why, if she's been struggling in a band where she's protected by basically her sisters, because they've been friends for so long, and is struggling so much that she's come away from it, then to go into the spotlight again completely solo.
Her new sound and look did not land with the public or her former bandmates.
There was a lot of criticism and accusations against Jesy that she was doing blackfishing, which is when someone alters their appearance to try and look like someone with black-coloured skin. Her bandmate Leigh-Anne was quite vocal about this because obviously she is one of the bandmates in Little Mix who had experienced racism herself. She'd done her own documentary about struggles with race in the music industry, and she'd been quite sort of really vocal about this. And so I think for her to then see someone she was so close to almost use the things that herself had been weaponised for to benefit her career really sort of stung Leigh-Anne.
My intentions are to never ever to offend anyone, and genuinely, like, it actually does really hurt me that I may have offended people and actually like hurt people's feelings just by genuinely celebrating something that I love.
Things went from bad to worse when Nicki Minaj decided to wade into the conversation.
You don't have to attack someone else. If that's how you felt, why was you keying with her and being in the videos with her for 10 years? Now, all of a sudden, she's not in a video with you. You have some negative, evil thing to do and say?
It was an uncontrolled crisis conversation taking place. She just, understandably, in the moment, probably was panicking, didn't know what to do. It contradicted Jesy's previous anti-bullying messaging. And it just came across terrible. I mean, it transformed a pretty serious conversation about cultural sensitivity into quite a personal feud. And yeah, the basic PR rule is to never litigate like a complicated dispute live, especially with an angry third party. It was just a disaster all around, to be honest. Like, if she has a PR team, they must have been crying watching that, but they should never have allowed her to do it in the first place.
Leigh-Anne really didn't feel like Jesy had her back in that moment. There was no attempt to defend her, stick up for her. And that really was sort of the final nail in the coffin for their friendship. There was no way back from that.
Jesy's solo career was over before it began, and it wasn't long before Little Mix would follow in her footsteps. In May of 2022, they played their final concert, marking the beginning of what the girls called a hiatus.
They all pursue their own solo careers, and you can't blame them for that. You know, they've seen Jesy give it a go, now they want to, but I think it makes you kind of reflect back on the band in the last few years as being, oh, were they all just sort of secretly plotting to be the famous one, to be the most successful one? And it ends up being like a competition. And I think when you've gone from being on X Factor, sort of loved and adored for being very much this girl, female empowerment, to then suddenly who's going to get the number one, who's doing the best music, who's doing the most, who's doing the least. It then becomes this really competitive nature.
4 years later, and Little Mix have yet to reunite, and while the others have focused on their solo careers, Jesy took a step back from the spotlight, only to re-enter it again when she shared some devastating news about her newborn twins.
The girls have now been diagnosed with a severe muscle disease called SMA type 1. For those of you that don't know what SMA type 1 is, it is the most severe muscular disease that a baby can get. It stands for spinal muscular atrophy, which can affect, well, it does affect every muscle in the body, down to legs, arms, breathing, swallowing. And essentially what it does is, over time, it kills the muscles in the body.
Jesy's entire world is completely shattered. You know, you talk about worrying about if you're number one in the charts, if you're getting abused on social media, like that, who cares about that? And that was her entire focus. It was just all about the kids, and it has been ever since then.
Despite all the ups and downs of the past couple of years, it looked like Little Mix was ready to leave the messy days of 2021 behind them. Until they weren't.
Perry was on Jamie Leng's podcast, and I just found this really bizarre. I found that the timing of it, she was about to get married. You know, she was on there to promote herself, and yet when speaking about Jesy and the documentary, she really made it clear that there was no going back with their friendship, that it was Jesy's fault that they were no longer speaking, that it was Jesy's fault because of the documentary that she had done. It felt very insensitive, not reading the room, and I just didn't understand it at all. It was such a bizarre PR move for Perry to do.
For me personally, I think she was just defending herself, but I just felt like it was unnecessary. Like, Little Mix weren't getting bad press, so she didn't have to say anything.
With the girls making headlines again, the question on everybody's lips is, will the once best friends ever be able to fix their fractured friendships?
I do think we are going to see them get back together, but if we do see them back together, it's definitely going to be as a three. I think we can rule out any chance of Jesy coming back. It's not going to happen.
I can't see Jesy putting herself back in that situation. You know, she's seen the worst things that could ever happen to her play out for real. I just think that everything with music and it all seems a bit pointless, you know, a bit superficial. There might be a time going forward that she pursues her own music career again, maybe in the future. She's got a lot of emotion. She's split up from her fiance. She's going through all of this with the kids. I'm sure she's got a lot of healing to do through music.
People say time heals all wounds, but for Little Mix, it seems like all the time in the world may not be enough to bring the band back together.